Welcome back, everybody, to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and I'm here with Simon Miners of the Frazier History Museum. He is the communication and research specialist, and has been there for a while. He started out as the public relations writer. Thank you for joining us, Simon. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Jameson, for having me on the show. Been a fan of this show since not long after you guys launched in 2019. So keep up the good work there. My background, I can tell you, I was hired at the Frazier in November 2017. I am from Louisville, born and raised here. I attended University of Louisville for both my bachelor's and my master's degrees in humanities. They offer degrees in humanities. I did not have much of a particular interest or passion for Kentucky history until, I would say, grad school. I initially went in to get my master's degree to study Dante at University of Louisville. And so I took Greek mythology and Hebrew Bible and Italian language. But I eventually shifted focus to modern culture. And what led me into Kentucky history was the summer 2016. That was when Muhammad Ali passed away, right? Mm-hmm. And at the time, for whatever reason, I think I was reading a biography of his, and something led me to read a biography of Colonel Sanders, because I think of those two as the two biggest figures representing Kentucky as like global ambassadors for the state, right?
Yeah.
So what I ended up writing my final paper, my research paper in grad school on Colonel Sanders and Muhammad Ali.
Wow.
Now, I'll tell you what I found that connected those two, because I thought it was interesting. I saw there was a poll in 1976 that said those were the two most famous people in the world at that time. It was, I don't remember who conducted the poll. I've seen it referenced in, I think, James Clotter, who writes the historian. So I haven't seen that source. I can't confirm that. But, I mean, that tracks, because that's when Ali it was after he'd returned to boxing, and Colonel Sanders was still alive. The thing about what brought the two of them together is I realized that Ali's big fight. Have you been watching this KET documentary that's airing?
No, I haven't, but I hear it's pretty good.
So it's a 4-episode series on Ali's life and career. Well, a big milestone for him was February '64. He defeated Sonny Liston and became heavyweight champ. And then he immediately announced he had joined the Nation of Islam. And on like 2 weeks later, it was a Friday, March 6th, 1964. That was when the leader of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, went on the radio and he announced that Muhammad Ali is a slave name. I will rename him, he said Cassius Clay is a slave name. I will rename him Muhammad Ali as long as he believes in Allah and follows me. So that was sort of the christening of Muhammad Ali as a figure and as a global icon representing Nation of Islam, representing like his like Black heritage and sort of owning his identity, right? Branding himself. The thing that I noticed when I was reading that Colonel Sanders biography, that is the exact same day that Colonel Sanders signed the papers to sell his own image and likeness to the new owners of KFC. He sat down in a KFC restaurant and signed the papers because he was getting up in years. He had been approached by John Y. Brown to sell his share of the company. So that was the day he sat there and signed those papers. And as part of the deal, he relinquished control of the company, but also his name and his likeness. And it ended up being owned by Kentucky Fried Chicken. And I don't know if you know much about this, but that was 64. He ended up dying in 1980. And in those 15 years between, he had a big falling out with KFC because he thought that they were degrading the quality of his chicken and his biscuits, his gravy. He was very much quality control, right? So he ended up suing them.
They didn't have a lawsuit, yeah.
Yeah, well, he would go. I mean, and technically it was weird because I think he might have still been on their payroll because he was like a lifetime ambassador for KFC. But in the '70s, he took a New York Times food critic into a KFC in Manhattan, and he just said, "This gravy tastes like wallpaper paste. Like this is awful. You know, don't eat it, KFC." So I took that. I thought that was a weird coincidence that these guys, they sort of became icons. They gave their name, their image the same day, and they went totally different ways, you know, and that they became the ambassadors for Kentucky on the world stage.
Probably like no others before them, really, honestly. And if you were to talk to other people about Kentucky, or those two people are probably going to be still come up that KFC or Kentucky Fried Chicken is what everybody thinks about. When
Right.
they probably put Kentucky first. Horse racing, of course, is up there, and basketball to an extent. But if you're thinking worldwide, those two people probably definitely have the biggest impact. Um, but wow,
Yeah.
that's crazy! I didn't know that. That's so cool.
It was just a freak thing, and it was after Ali died. I watched the funeral procession, and I was there right as the his hearse was pulling into Cave Hill Cemetery, which is where Colonel Sanders is buried. There's a line on the painted on the road. You can follow it. I think it's a green line. It'll take you to Colonel Sanders, and then now there's like a yellow line that'll take you to Ali's grave. Um, but
Wow.
yeah, I remember chucking a rose on the hearse. I mean, and it was. I mean, because the president of Turkey. I mean, there were heads of state. He was
Yeah.
sort of a representative of big culture, religion. I mean, he was so. And
Big
Colonel
respect.
Sanders, I mean, there's more KFC restaurants than probably McDonald's or anything else. I don't know the numbers, but so
Yeah,
they are.
worldwide, definitely. Yeah.
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 Um,
So have you? Well, I mean, let's. I was going to say, I went to the Muhammad Ali Museum a while back, but we won't get too much into another museum. Let's, I guess,
sure.
stick to one. But you said that got you into history. What led you to the Frazier Museum?
So I wrapped up there at University of Louisville. That was May 2017, and was looking at a couple different opportunities, but I had a writing background. I had been freelance writing sort of opinion pieces and current events articles. I had when I was I think in 2012 I had an internship at the New Republic magazine in Washington D.C. So I'd had an interest in politics and current events that I'd been freelance writing for the Courier Journal for a couple of different outlets. So I saw the Frazier had an opening, and I met with the president then, Penny Peevler, and I met with some of the administrators. And because of my writing background, they were needing someone in the marketing department. So I was hired November 1st, and I became public relations writer. So at the time, that meant there were still just two of us in the marketing department, myself and the marketing manager, but the bulk of my job at that time was just writing press releases, announcing our new exhibits, our new public programs, events. We have a product release. I mean, we've got a lot of, tie in with the bourbon industry here. We're the first stop on the Bourbon Trail. So I basically had to do a lot of that, and then updating our web pages, putting more information out about about the museum.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So writing.
Yeah. And the thing is, too, I'll bring this up. A lot of people in Kentucky may not even have heard of the Frazier Museum. Me personally, as a kid, we went often to the museum there in Frankfurt, and there's the Lexington's children. There's the Children Museum there in Lexington. I'm thinking of. I can't think of any. I know there is, but any in Lexington, any museums in Lexington right off besides the children's one. I know there are some, but they're leaving me. There's a lot of little museums here and there, and all these, small towns and in Western Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky. You can find these museums, but the Frazier Museum right there in Louisville, I hadn't heard of it before. So tell us how it got started, what's it about, and so forth.
So the Frazier starts with the founder. The story of the Frazier starts with the founder, Owsley Brown Frazier. If you know anything about Louisville, you know the name Brown is tied into the Brown family, the Frazier family. Owsley's maternal great-grandfather was George Garvin Brown, the founder of Brown Forman, the liquor distribution company.
Oh.
Makes Woodford Reserve, Old Forester. So I don't know how long the Brown family's been here in Louisville, but Owsley was born in 1935, and he was a vice chairman. I think he worked for Brown Forman for decades, and he had a passion for firearms, for guns, for weapons, military technology. And it wasn't from a childhood per se. It was, I think he went camping, or he stayed with a relative of his up in Canada, and they would hunt. And this relative gave him a Kentucky long rifle when he was a kid in the 1950s. And that, I think it was in Owsley's home, which was the Avish. It's a historic estate here in Louisville, but it was on display there. And then in 1974, there was a super outbreak of a major tornado that carved a path through Louisville. Right? You've probably talked about or read about this.
Well, we had an episode about the Louisville tornado of 1890. And in that episode, Robert Conne talked about the one in the 70s there. His parents were in Louisville during that time and stuff. But go ahead.
So the 1974 tornado went all through the city, but it went through, I think, the Crescent Hill area, sort of like Brownsboro Road, East Louisville, and it destroyed a big part of that home, the Avish. And in the wreckage, the Kentucky long rifle was lost. And apparently, Owsley, who was, I guess, 40 then, 39, 40, went on a quest to find it or to replace it. And that sparked an interest in arms collecting. And it's like a niche community of people that have a sort of background in this, a passion for understanding historic weapons. And so he started collecting this, like, just privately on his own, just for his own enjoyment. And when he retired in 2000 from Brown Forman, he had such a big collection. He thought he wanted to show it to the community because he was an enormous philanthropist. I mean, he gave away $500 million in his lifetime to different causes in Louisville, education primarily. So he knew he had this, and he didn't want to just keep it to himself. He wanted to show it off. So that summer of 2000, he had an exhibit at Kentucky History Center in Frankfurt called The Art of the Weapon. And it was just stuff that he'd collected. And apparently he didn't anticipate it, but there was just this huge turnout of people that wanted to come see it. I mean, we're talking General Custer's ivory-coated pistols and
wow,
George Washington's flintlock hunting rifle. It's like the only known rifle belonged to George Washington that's still known to exist. And we've got that here. It's we do. So we've got a lot of gems here. So when he saw the outgrowth of support and public interest in that, he knew he had a new project now that he was retired. So he made plans to found a museum here in Louisville. So he started the foundation and for the Owsley Brown Frazier Historical Arms Museum, and bought this 4-story building here on the corner of 9th and Main Streets, and made plans for the museum. There were a couple delays, but it ultimately opened May 2004.
Wow.
And since you mentioned that 1890 tornado, I can just tell you the story of this building here. That 1890 tornado ripped up a part of downtown Louisville, including what you call the Tobacco District, which is here, like the west side of Main Street. So it leveled the tobacco warehouse that was where the Frazier is now. If you pull up one of those, there's like Sanborn fire insurance maps you can access, and you can see where in 1894 it just says like ruins tumbling down, like on the north side of our building. But the lot was bought by John Doerhofer, who was a tobacco capitalist. I mean, who had a firm, and the building was built in 1898, I think. The interesting thing, like we have really neat architecture. This West Main Street has the biggest gathering of historic, cast iron facades in America. After Soho in New York, we're like the #1 place for cast iron facade buildings. But the cupola here, the building, the architecture was designed by D.X. Murphy, the people who did the same draftsman who did the Twin Spires at Churchill Downs. Okay. So wow. It was historic architecture, and the building served a lot of purposes over the years. It was a garment factory in the early 1900s, and then retail and so forth. But it was purchased in 01, and the museum opened in 04.
Wow, well, that is quite fascinating. Just a story in general of the creation of the museum. It seems like Mr. Frazier seems like a pretty interesting fella.
Sure.
Because he would have been. You said he worked in 35. Is that what you said?
He was born in 35. He was gifted that rifle in 52 when he was a teen, and then the tornado took it away in 74. So he became a collector over the next 25 years. And it was of public interest then. You can go back and a big component of my work, you've probably utilized this, is newspapers.com. That subscription is worth every penny. You want to find information about the history of a site, you go in, like for me, I'll search. The Frazier Museum occupies a couple storefronts on Main Street, like 825 through 833. So I'll just go in there and I'll search 825 W Main, 825 West Main. And you can find hits dating back to when the building was open. You can find, crime reports of like a stick up that happened, or an art exhibit, or, a sale of patio furniture. I mean, it's so neat. So that, I don't know, that the thing about the Frazier though, what made it, generate a lot of public interest was in 2000. I think it was as the plans were being made for the museum to open, the Royal Armories, which is the arsenal that has historically served the monarchs of the United Kingdom and England, dating back to like the 1400s. They developed a partnership because they've had a ton of interest from Americans, and so they developed the first partnership with a non-British museum, and they signed an accord, and it had to be approved by an act of parliament, but they signed an accord with the Frazier in 03 before we opened to loan us some armor and weapons from the Middle Ages up to the present. Oh. And so when the museum opened in 04, we had like, 1,000, 1,200, 1,300 objects on display, but a good quarter of it was from the UK. It was from the Royal Armories. It had to be brought in, secured, motorcade, like all that stuff. So that brought a lot of international publicity too at the opening. So that was a cool feather in our cap for sure.
That is really interesting. I just wondered how much of the story of Washington's rifle, like who had it before. I mean, did we know that, or
it was there's a great book that was published in 2003 in anticipation of the museum opening. At the time, the curator, the chief curator, he passed away in 2006, so he didn't get to do too much work here. But from everything I've read, he was a really fascinating guy. He had a background in Massachusetts and in the military. But Walter Karczewski, he wrote a book called Selections from the Frazier History Museum. We have copies floating around here at the museum. I don't even know where else you can obtain one. We might still sell some in our gift shop, but it's got detailed information about a lot of those artifacts that still belong to the museum. I mean, it was things that belonged when we opened. Bear in mind, we've rebranded and several things have been deaccessioned or sold off over the years. But one of those things that we've definitely kept on is the flintlock hunting rifle. And I can't recall the name of the guy who made it, the gunsmith, but it was on display in Philadelphia for several decades in the 30s through the 70s. But it's yeah, I could get back to you with more info on that.
Well,
That's not one of.
okay.
I'll tell you a couple other artifacts if you're interested. The
Yeah, yeah.
So the way the museum is now, it's the fourth floor is a lot of our revenues. We book private spaces for events, weddings, and so on. But the three floors 1 through 3 is all exhibit galleries. It's 10,000 square feet of exhibit space, and the second floor on the mezzanine, you'll just see that's the founders gallery. It's a lot of the things that were part of the original collection here that Owsley collected. He unfortunately passed away in 2012. I never met him, but the artifacts we still have on display. We have Daniel Boone's family's Bible. We have the George Washington's hunting rifle. We've got some of those, because the emphasis early on was the technology, the artistry of the weapon. We've got early models of like a Colt revolver that was gifted to Samuel Remington, like very early.
Yeah.
My favorite case, though, I give some tours about, is we've got some artifacts from the Lincolns. Specifically, we have if you know, Mary Todd and Abraham Lincoln had 3 or 4 children, and only one survived until adulthood, Robert. Well, we have an infant garment that Mary Todd made for her son, Robert. And then, you'll know, obviously, her husband was assassinated in front of her, and that contributed to mental health issues that she suffered from. And so ultimately, Robert had his mother institutionalized, and we have the arrest warrant that was issued for Mary Todd Lincoln.
Wow.
So it's sort of a tragic book in there. We've got the diaper that she made for him, and then the arrest warrant he had taken out for his mother. In that same case, though, we have Geronimo's bow and arrows.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
It's part of the original collection because of the artistry. It was, Geronimo was war chief for the Apache Nation. And in the 1870s, that was when the U.S. Army was trying to corral all the Apaches into this reservation, San Carlos in Arizona. And it was just scorpions and rattlesnakes, and they couldn't grow any good food. So Geronimo would just lead these jailbreaks to help people escape and go live in the Sierra Madre Mountains. And the Army got they were totally unequipped. They were unfamiliar with the terrain. These settlers, they didn't know it. They couldn't navigate it on horseback like the Apaches could. So eventually they needed to put a stop to it, and they devoted in the summer of 1886, a full 5,000 troops just to capturing Geronimo, which was a quarter of the U.S. Army. Spent the summer tracking down this guy and the 36 people he had living in the mountains. So that's where, when he surrendered, he turned over his cache of weapons, and apparently this bow and quiver of arrows was part of that cache. So we've got that on display, as well as a portrait of Geronimo, or an original that was taken of him after he was incarcerated at Fort Sill.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I think about each one of those items can constitutes a podcast episode in its own, just about it.
So just to sink this into sort of telling you about the trajectory of the museum here, the challenge of the Frazier has been branding, I think, since the beginning, since well before I came through this museum. Opening in 2004, it was very firmly it was the artistry and history of the weapon, but it was more than that. It was using firearms and armor to illustrate history of warfare, political change, colonialism, settlers, Western expansion, all that. That proved to be a little too niche. And I don't think the level of attendance met what the expectations were. So the Frazier actually rebranded 2 years after it opened as the Frazier International History Museum, and began shifting its attention towards those big temporary exhibits, right? Rather than permanent exhibits about what was in Owsley's collection and the Royal Armories. There was a lot of success in that. We ended up dropping the international. We're strictly Frazier History Museum now. And most all of our stuff pertains to Kentucky and sort of Kentucky's relationship to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So the big, I would say, I mean, we've had exhibits on Princess Diana, on I'm looking at all the posters I have up in my office, Leonardo da Vinci, all the things in the last 5-6 years or whatever have been Kentucky related, and that's the where we're going. I mean, that's our identity. Our slogan is where the world meets Kentucky. You know, we want to sort of familiarize people with Kentucky's role in the world stage. That's sort of how my interest began, looking at Kentucky's two biggest ambassadors on the global stage, Ali and Colonel Sanders, right?
Yeah. And you know, I'm of course probably biased. You know, I kind of think, you know, Kentucky's probably the best place in the world. So, you know, it should you should focus on it, right?
I mean, I think about that. I wrote a little bit about that when I wrote an article for our newsletter on the solar eclipse of 2017, and I thought this is just sort of driving home the point that I've always kind of understood in my heart, which is that Kentucky is the greatest place in the world. I mean, we have the biggest cave system in the world underneath our feet. We've got this shelf of limestone filtering out our groundwater, making it calcium rich and tasty. We've got all these, you know, bluegrass, you know, the land between the meadows, tobacco fields, cornfields, the oak timber. I mean, mountains. It's like a Shangri-La. It really is.
It's awesome. So when it comes to, I mean, you've kind of talked a lot about this. Like, you know, there's, I guess you call them exhibits, you know, that come in and out. We talked about a few of the things that are personally there, but people can come take tours. Whenever if somebody wanted to come and take a tour, what do? They plan one, or they just walk in the door?
People can just walk in the door. I mean, we're open 6 days out of the week. We have a regular schedule of a couple people give tours. I'm one of them. I'm only given one tour a week, but my colleague Mick Sullivan and my other colleague Shelby Durbin both work in the education department, and they give phenomenal tours. We do have a lot of our people coming in are people coming in on the Bourbon Trail as well. I should mention that. You know, in 2015, I know you've done episodes on bourbon, and there's, you know, the bourbon community. I mean, there's so much information out there. But in 2015, 2 years before I came here, we became the first stop on the Bourbon Trail. So actually, I was hired 2017, and then the end of the following summer, we opened this huge permanent exhibit on our third floor called The Spirit of Kentucky. And we tell the history of the category of bourbon. And you can get history of bourbon stuff at all the distilleries on the tour, but we try to differentiate ourselves by not being beholden to any one brand or any one firm, any distillery. So we talk about just the things we were talking about, the geography and geology of Kentucky that predispose it to bourbon production. And the sort of close-knit community nature of the industry itself. I mean, in 1996, Heaven Hill had that big warehouse fire, and 2% of the world's bourbon just burned up. And so their competitors, rather than saying, sucks to be you, they all pitched in and provided them some of the juice so that they could bottle it as their own, because they are looking out for each other, right? We sort of talk about the nature of the industry like that in our exhibit, and we have the Bourbon Trail Welcome Center where it's sort of a concierge service where we offer tastings here. We help people plan their trips and so on.
Yeah, that's what I say. Help plan trips, and because I've never been on the Bourbon Trail. The craziest thing that I ever heard with the Bourbon Trail is I can't remember what it's called, but it's the run. Like you run throughout the day, and it's a big marathon run of like all these people, and like they stop at the bourbon places as they run. I don't know what it's called. I can't think of it right off the top of my head, but I couldn't do it.
That is pretty low on my list of things I would want to do for bourbon tourism. If somebody wants to do that, though, more power to them.
Yeah. So you mentioned the hours and the location. And what about donating? I mean, people can donate to the museum, or is that's a possibility, right?
Sure. Yeah, we've got all that stuff set up on our website. We've got some different levels of supporters and memberships. I can say, so just to sort of tie it back into the trajectory of the museum here, we were really thrown for a loop at the start of COVID, like everyone else in the world. So we shut our doors, and we eventually, when we reopened, it was slow getting people back downtown. There were a lot of businesses still closed in downtown Louisville. So in October 2020, we launched a free membership campaign for anyone who lives in the 12 county area. And we were expecting just a couple thousand. We got like many thousands, like way more than we expected. So that's generated a lot of interest. We've had a lot of new people coming in the doors. Obviously there's like, it's not a permanent thing. So, but it was just to sort of acquaint people with the Frazier, and I don't know what the future of that model. We're going to have a different membership model probably by the time this is published, but yeah. So what we accept donations, and we have, like I said, a big part of our revenue is booking spaces for private events and so on. But
what is one thing that you talked about some things that I didn't expect you all to have either. But what is one thing that is like out of the things that you've not already said, what's one thing there that like would just blow people's minds? I mean, the Mary Todd arrest warrant would probably be the one I would say. I don't know if you're going to blow anybody's mind beyond that, but go ahead.
Well, I'm not going to answer your question. I'm going to give you a couple things instead. Because it's too hard to choose. I give tours of our cool Kentucky exhibit that opened last October, and that has some neat artifacts that's just representing all the people and places from Kentucky. One big artifact in there is the American Pearl. That is the boat that Tori Murden McClure, the president of Spalding University here, she's an explorer. She took that boat in 1999 and she rowed solo across the Atlantic Ocean in it. And she, in doing so, became the first American and the first woman to ever row the Atlantic solo. Wow. So we have the American Pearl on display here at the Frazier. I mean, she had attempted to do it in 98, right? But she hit a hurricane halfway through. So when she was shut in the cabin where she slept, she was getting tossed up and down like clothes in a washing machine, and she dislocated her shoulder. So she couldn't row anymore and she had to quit. But the next year she tried it and she succeeded. That I think is a huge artifact.
Yeah, and you're talking about rowing a boat as in rowing with your arms, right?
Rowing with your arms. She would just sit in this sliding chair like 15, 16 hours a day, just rowing, taking a little short lunch break. Must have been just painfully boring. Scary, you know.
Yeah.
She's very impressive though. So that's a big artifact. That's right when you walk in the museum. But there are two things on the second floor that really stick out in my mind. The first is the Bledner Monument. I don't know, I haven't gotten this far into your show yet, but have you all done an episode on the Battle of Rowlett Station in Munfordville? So this was December 1861. This was on the Green River, so not too far from Mammoth Cave. I think I saw signs last time I went to Mammoth Cave, but it was the 32nd Indiana Infantry Regiment, was the Union, and they were there to guard this railroad against Confederate aggression. And the interesting thing, that regiment was all German American immigrants. They had, after Fort Sumter, after the war started, there was this outpouring of support from a lot of recent immigrants who were trying to prove their loyalty to their adopted country, and they were trying to join the armed services. So there were several regiments that were just for like specific, nationalities of immigrants. So this was German, and they all spoke German and stuff, but they came through Louisville, and then they were guarding this railroad in December 1861 in Munfordville, and they had a battle with they fought off. It was sort of a close battle, but I think they maybe strategically succeeded. A much larger Confederate force, but one of the survivors was a private named August Bledner, and he took a big slab of St. Genevieve limestone and he carved a monument to the dead on the Union side. It was 11 or 12 figures, and he carved a monument with their names in it, and then stuck it on the battlefield, which was common during the war, right? You bury the dead on the battlefield. If you're lucky enough to have a sculptor in your unit, maybe they'll do a monument, and then you stick it there and you move on, which is what happened. I think in January they moved on, and the war went on for 3 more years. After the war, the dead were all dug up and reburied in national cemeteries. They all came to Cave Hill here in Louisville, and the monument moved there too. So it was stood in the Cave Hill Cemetery for 150 years until it started spalling. It was deteriorating, and it had to be restored. And then we obtained it on a long-term loan in 2010. We've had it ever since. Long way for me to say this is such a special monument because it is the oldest known Civil War monument in the United States.
Oh, wow. Whoa, yeah.
And I try to communicate that to people. I think it's such a special thing that we have. There's a very short book on it by a fellow named Michael Peake, I think. But it's just interesting to see that, especially because Civil War monuments as a topic of discussion in current events and the debate around whether or not to remove certain Confederate monuments, it almost always revolves around monuments that were erected in like 1910 for the explicit purpose of intimidating people of color and to reinforce white supremacy. Whereas this is literally contemporary to the event, to the people that died in the event, right?
Yeah.
So it is the definition of a contemporary monument, right? And I think that's just neat. It's in our Civil War exhibit, and I love to show people that.
That might be the winner. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, well, I haven't told you the other one.
Okay.
We've had this since before the museum opened. I think Owsley might have purchased it knowing that he was going to open this museum. We have a Royal Grade double-barreled Holland & Holland rifle that was made in 1908 and gifted to then President Teddy Roosevelt. He was leaving office in March 1909, and we all know Teddy Roosevelt was a big naturalist, hunter. So he had made plans as soon as he was out of the presidency to leave Washington, and he wanted to go on a safari with his son Kermit. So he made plans and to go on eventually right after he left office that same month, he and his son and a team of people went to Africa for 11 months. And he has a travel or a journal that he wrote at that time that's very detailed, that's now been published. But that rifle was gifted to him for that safari, and he took it and he used that rifle all during the safari. You can read about it in his journal. He hunted water buffalo, elephants. He'd stalk rhinos on Mount Kenya. They go through, and apparently they said that the kickback was so strong that one time he shot it and the guy standing next to him got a nosebleed. Like, he's got these really neat details about it. So after he returned, and they obtained all sorts of plant and animal specimens, but the rifle later got the nickname the Big Stick. Oh. So it is Teddy Roosevelt's Big Stick. We have that on display here.
Well, that's pretty cool. I will have to side though. I'll have to side with the Kentucky sure. Relic, the monument. That's really cool. Well, I mean, I guess the next time I'm in Louisville, we're going to have to stop by and check some of this stuff out.
For sure. Yeah, I'd love to give you a tour anytime. One other thing I would like your listeners to know about is Virtual Frazier magazine. When we closed our doors in March 2020, like so many other institutions, we shifted very abruptly to an online only content, right? Because we weren't having folks come in the door, but we needed to fulfill our mission to ignite the human spirit, to educate the community. So we launched this newsletter that became like daily. It's now weekly since we've reopened the museum, but in that time we've developed a huge subscriber base of now we have about 35 to 40,000 readers. And we write about Kentucky history. We send it out. We send out a new issue every Monday morning. It's free. If you could just subscribe on our website, fraziermuseum.org. But we have video interviews. We talk about things that are on display in the museum. We talk about local history, Kentucky history, and it's a collaborative effort from all of our staff members that writing about things they're working on. We plug the programs, our Bridging the Divide interview series that my colleague Rachel Platt does. And we have columns like Curator's Corner, where our curator, Amanda Breed, writes about whatever she's working on. I mean, she could be installing a new display and a new exhibit. So that's something I'd like your listeners to know about. The other thing is our current exhibit is just opened, or I'll say it opened in September 2021, is called West of 9th, Race, Reckoning, and Reconciliation. That covers the 9 neighborhoods of West Louisville, Algonquin, Shawnee, Chickasaw, and 6 others. And it's based on a blog called West of 9th by a couple named Walt and Shay Smith, where they interview residents of West Louisville, students, a dentist, a musician, a politician, activist, restaurant owners and proprietors, and talk about, their day-to-day lives or whatever experience is going on. So it's an adaptation of that. They have co-curated the exhibit, but it weds it to a historical context of discussing the status of West Louisville. Louisville is very racially segregated along 9th Street. So it discusses sort of the redlining issues that went into how that came into place. It wasn't always as segregated racially, but it's sort of a discussion of community development, past and present. And we partnered with the Courier Journal. They've contributed some print editions of their Beyond Breonna section, which is a series they did on Breonna Taylor and the anti-racist uprising that occurred in the wake of her killing. So it touches on a lot of issues. So it's that's a big project that's been a long time in the making. And I think we were in discussion about that. A lot of things were postponed because of the pandemic, but we're getting back in the groove of things here.
Yeah, I think that goes with most people are getting back, or it seems like we're getting back into the groove of things. I would definitely encourage people to check out that newsletter. Go up to the museum itself and check out some stuff. Some of those things you mentioned are just amazing. I mean, I want to come up there and see them for sure. What about social media? I know the website, and we'll put a link to the website in the description. Do y'all have any social media accounts and those sorts of things?
Sure. Yeah, you can. I don't know the handles, but it's pretty easy to find us. We're Frazier History Museum or Frazier Museum. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, primarily Facebook you'll see, but also Instagram and Instagram stories. We try to, like, maybe once a week at least, just have a neat Kentucky history story with some old photos, something maybe that you didn't know about Kentucky. A lot of it is doubled up content from our newsletter. So if you want to get it first, you can subscribe to the newsletter. You'll get it emailed to you Monday morning. You'll learn all types of things about Kentucky that you never knew. We've got, and we're a lot of us, obviously we live in the Louisville area, but we're all making trips to make sure that we're getting firsthand experience in different, going to visit the general store in Rabbit Hash, or going touring Carter Caves, or Merle Travis's boyhood home, wherever it is. Kentucky has no shortage of interesting stories to tell, past and present, and there's not enough time. We want to tell all those stories.
Yeah, you got that right. That's what we're doing, man. Finding those good Kentucky stories that people forget about, man. You don't want people to forget about some of these. They're quite amazing. Simon, thank you for joining us. Is there anything else you want to bring up? floor's yours for a few more seconds.
I'll say we've got artifacts from the Kentucky Colonels. We had the ABA basketball team, the Colonels, based in Louisville. Yeah. We have original uniforms from Colonels players in the 1970s. Their shoes, their gym bags, their
cool.
Plus the box score even from when they played the Indiana Pacers in the championship, and just all sorts of neat things, sports, inventions. We have patent replicas, and you'll learn. You will come away. You'll learn 10 things about Kentucky you didn't know.
Yeah. Well, one thing you can definitely, when you get another new exhibit that comes up, you are free and invited back to come back on and talk about it some more. There's probably plenty of stuff we can talk about. We could probably have a podcast episode a day. I'd say there's so much we could talk about. But sure. Thanks again for coming on, and thanks everybody for listening. If you got anything else, good to go.
Good to go.
All right. Well, thanks again for listening, and we'll see everybody next time. Thanks for listening.